Before I formally introduce Mr. Duncan today, I would like to take this moment to thank Linda Bertoldi of BLG Canada and David O'Brien of Toronto Hydro for co-sponsoring today's event. Thank you, Linda and David. I would also like to welcome two groups of students to today's lunch. They are Neil McNeil, Catholic Secondary, sponsored by RBC Financial Group, and Central Technical School, sponsored by BMO Financial Group. Students, would you please stand so we can recognize you? And thank you to both of today's student sponsors. And now I would like to introduce today's special guest. We're indeed pleased that Minister Dwight Duncan could be with us today. He is a seasoned member of Premier Dalton McGuinty's Liberal government. First elected to Queen's Park in 1995, Dwight Duncan has won 3 consecutive elections in the riding of Windsor-St. Clair. He has served as Minister of Finance, Chair of Management Board of Cabinet, as well as Government House Leader. He's also currently Chair of Cabinet. Minister Duncan is no stranger to public life. A lifelong resident of Windsor, he sat on Windsor City Council for 6 years and served on the staff of the Honourable Herb Gray, former Deputy Prime Minister, and former Ontario Labour Minister, Bill Rye. A graduate of McGill and the University of Windsor, Dwight Duncan holds degrees in Economics and Commerce, as well as an MBA. He addresses us today as Minister of Energy, a portfolio he has held twice in the term of this government. Energy is, of course, a hot topic. It is not so long ago that millions of commuters in the GTA left work on a bright, sunny August afternoon without the benefit of public transit or traffic signals. And when they arrived home, there wasn't any electricity to fuel the air conditioners or to make the fridge or the stove work. Instead, they improvised. While the origin of that blackout in August 2003 was south of the border, it brought home to Ontarians how much they rely on a stable electricity system. And for the world of commerce, it reminded businesses of the years of reliable and affordable energy rates here in Ontario. For his part, Minister Duncan has sought meaningful change to Ontario's electricity sector. He set out to foster a culture of conservation while ensuring a reliable, sustainable, affordable power supply. I know you'll join me in welcoming Minister Duncan. I understand we're lucky to have him here in one piece, as I've learned that his son Sean has recently earned his Ontario driver's license. Minister Duncan.
Thank you, Noella, and it's great to see everybody here. I like that line, a seasoned political veteran. I like to think of it as been burned over a few times. I mean, how many people have been energy minister not once, but twice? And in between that, I was at finance. I told the premiers I'm going from the frying pan to the fire back into the frying pan. But it is good to be here with you today, and this is the second time I have addressed the Canadian Club, and it's always a great honor. The last time I was here, I brought some friends from Greenpeace. I don't know if they're here today. If they are, I'd ask them to stand up and let's get it over with right now. I checked under the table. I didn't see them, and so I'm presuming I'm going to be safe this speech, but if not, I'd be happy to engage them in a democratic dialogue, because that is part of democracy, as we all know. For over 100 years, the Canadian Club of Toronto has been a forum for dialogue, debate, and discussion on the key issues facing our province and country. Today, I want to talk about our government's plan to restore Ontario's energy future and the results that we have achieved in 3 years. There is no other Canadian province or U.S. state that has done more to secure its energy future than the government of Premier Dalton McGuinty. To appreciate what's been achieved over the last 36 months, you need to think back, as Noel indicated, to the summer of 2003. Our electricity system, a key part of our economy, was in shambles as a result of years of mismanagement, poor planning, and a lack of leadership. Now, I see my dear friend Jamie Watt over here, and I want to be clear that all of us bear the blame for that. This happened under successive governments because we kind of tried to keep our heads in the sand. We didn't want to address the tough questions. Our supply situation was in dismal shape. In the previous 10 years, Ontario actually lost electricity capacity, almost 1,800 megawatts, while at the same time demand went up almost 6.5%. Now, let me put that into a visual context for you. 1,800 megawatts is the equivalent of Niagara Falls going dry. That's how significant it was. Our transmission system, the 28,000-kilometer-long network that brings power to our cities and factories, had not had substantial investment, not enough. Everything that flowed was flowing, but we weren't looking to the future and what we had to flow. Finally, we had no plan for encouraging energy conservation. In fact, after Quebec, Ontario was using more electricity per capita than any other place in the world. We simply didn't value the commodity or appreciate the challenge of providing it. When the old Ontario Hydro was dismantled, the dismantling was poorly planned and executed. Her successor companies suffered from poor performance, competing priorities, and weak leadership. Ontario had no plan to ensure that there was enough electricity to meet our future growth. You know, I was down in New York. Funny thing is, when you're finance minister, you go to New York, they want to talk about energy. When you're energy minister, you go to New York, they want to talk about finance. And I've done both. But when I was down there, I met with some pretty sophisticated investment types and people who follow these things carefully. And they tell me that in the United States, for a new build nuclear site, Murray, from the time a public authority makes the decision to build or to provide nuclear power to the time power comes out of a plant, 20 years. Here in Ontario, we estimate somewhere between 10 and 15 years on nuke. Same thing with major hydroelectric installations. It's a long time frame. Now, 20 years in the U.S., that's 5 presidential elections, 10 congressional elections. The Senate rotates 1/3 every 6 years. Countless municipal elections. Instability. Risk. Not only from an investor's perspective, but from a long-term energy perspective. So we needed to be able to plan. And we had to plan for future growth. Because when we talk about reducing peak demand, we're not talking about an absolute reduction. We're talking about managing the rate of growth. The only time power absolutely declines in large amounts is on account of things you really don't want to have happen. Downturn in the economy, things like that. So on every issue, from supply to conservation to transmission to ridiculous pricing schemes, the last price cap cost the provincial treasury $1 billion in under 18 months. It was untenable and unsustainable. And frankly, we took the bait on that too. As everybody did. We tried to pretend that you didn't have to pay the real cost. And you do. First thing I did when I was energy minister, I took the price cap off. People are paying the true cost of electricity today. And by the way, price of electricity, the wholesale price, Adam, get this down, make a note of it, is now lower than it was in 2002, 2003. The industrial price on the spot market. So we were faced with quite a challenge. We looked at it. We looked at $1 billion off our bottom line. That's a lot of hospital beds. It's a lot of teachers for schools. It's a lot of environmental fix-ups. And we made a commitment to do what was necessary to right the wrongs and move this province forward. In 3 years, we have brought stability and growth to the system, and we've created the building blocks for a long-term energy future. The first time anyone's attempted to do that since the late 1980s. As I said, first thing I did, took the price cap off. Then we created Bill 100, a planning body, the Power Authority. I see Jan Carr here, the head of that. Now some people say there's too many bodies in electricity. Some people say we got too much regulation. But then when the press say, well, what would you get rid of? They don't answer. Some people don't like the hybrid market I created. When asked, I think the greatest compliment is when your political opponents say they're not going to change it. So we have moved forward. Today I'm going to talk to you about those measures in the North American context, because we often forget that we're not the only folks that have had a hard time. Do you know who had rolling brownouts this summer? What do you energy geeks call them, Tom? Voltage reductions. Voltage reductions. Alberta. California. New York. Not once in Ontario this summer. And we hit record demand, 27,000 megawatts, one hot summer day. So we've made real, tangible, industry-leading progress towards our goal. We've brought on more than 3,000 megawatts of new power in 3 years. And there's 10,000 megawatts at various stages of development. The plan has consisted of 3 elements and 2 outcomes. The elements, the supply, which I've just talked a little bit about. Investing in transmission infrastructure, and that's one we're going to have to talk a whole lot about in the next couple of years. A whole lot about. Because where our supply opportunities are, we don't have the wires to take it out. Now, we've also talked about creating a culture of conservation that will serve as the keystone for Ontario's long-term energy future. And it is great to have Dave O'Brien here, the president of Toronto Hydro, because Toronto Hydro is leading the way in Ontario. And I can tell you in the next little while we're going to be talking about some of the initiatives Toronto Hydro's taken that we're going to make province-wide. You know, one of my favorite ones, there used to be if you went and bought a new fridge, you used to get a tax cut. And refrigerator manufacturers came to me and said, that's about the dumbest thing you can do to encourage people to get a new fridge. I said, why is that? You know, think about it. You get the tax back, you go buy a new fridge. Well, what happens is, like I'm sure many of you have done, you go buy your new fridge, get your tax cut, you put the old fridge in the basement. So now you got 2 fridges. One an old Kelvinator, and if you see how much those things consume, you know why you ought to got rid of it. Bottom line, they said, rather than give a tax cut, give people 30 or 50 bucks and take away the old one. So we've done that. We've done 8 pilots, and the results have been oversubscribed everywhere they've happened. Just simple things like that. Talked about the 3,000 new megawatts, the 10,000 coming online. To put that into perspective, no jurisdiction in North America is bringing on more power than we are. Nowhere. $13 billion so far in investment, jobs and investment. And the supply sources are mixed. Nuclear, natural gas, hydro, wind, biomass, biogas. Earlier this year, we opened 3 new wind farms, and another 9 are in the works. And if you haven't seen one of those wind farms, go and see them. They are absolutely amazing. They make that little windmill down in the lakefront look little. And they're springing up everywhere. And they're being welcomed everywhere. Not only do they make sense from an environmental perspective, but it's another source of income for our farmers. You know, the wind companies that go and lease the land, cash flow, Not without controversy, I agree. But you know what? In 2008, Ontario will have gone from last in wind power generation in Canada to first. Now, it's not baseload power. We know that. We acknowledge that. We're not proposing to turn the whole system into a big windy electricity sector. But let me tell you what else has happened. In August, I opened the first windmill manufacturing facility in Ontario in Fort Erie. 160 people are employed. They are about to expand. A large German windmill manufacturer I had breakfast with this morning tells me they've got a 3-year backlog for windmills. 3-year backlog. Now, this company that's located in Fort Erie is manufacturing for all of North America. And you know where they're manufacturing? They're manufacturing in an automotive parts factory that had shut down. There's $1 trillion US on the table in renewable energy. If we can move from the carbon-based economy to the green economy. And believe me, folks, we are moving there. The company's called DMI. They're based in North Dakota, and they chose Ontario to serve the North American market. Moving beyond wind farms, we've created an ambitious and innovative standard offer program that Dr. David Suzuki has said will put Ontario at the absolute forefront of North America. The standard offer program, which will open in about 2 weeks' time, I think, Jan, will encourage the development of innovative, small, renewable energy projects right across the province. Through the program, our farmers, our businesses and industry will have an opportunity to manage their electricity needs and take advantage of, again, a whole new revenue stream. A whole new revenue stream. This represents an enormous change of culture from one of big plants and big wires to what we call distributed generation, where small projects can serve small communities and benefit our farms and provide cleaner, greener power. August of this year, Premier McGuinty and I had the pleasure of pushing the button to start the engines of Big Becky, the world's largest hard rock tunnel boring machine. And let me tell you, that thing is big. And you want to talk, they're drilling a 10-mile tunnel under the city of Niagara Falls to bring more power to the Adam Beck generating station. You know, some people thought about building a new generation station entirely, but we had a good look at it, and had we done that, we would have turned the falls into a rock climbing exhibit. But by doing this, we can bring more water to the existing generator and produce more power more efficiently. And by the way, Adam, I know your members will be interested in this. We're producing electricity at Niagara Falls, ladies and gentlemen, for 0.6 of 1 cent. Think about it. Our plan is making Ontario, as I said, the center of the renewable revolution in North America. Earlier this month, the Ontario Power Authority announced the winners of Ontario's first cogeneration RFP, which offers industries the ability to cogenerate electricity and heat and sell the electricity back to the grid for a fixed price. That was good news for industry, it's good news for our economy, and it's good news for the future of electricity in Ontario. As a government, we have committed to doing everything that is necessary to ensure Ontario has the power we need, and that has meant some tough decisions. Decisions that, frankly, government after government after government of all political stripes didn't take. In June, I announced the Supply Mix Directive to the Ontario Power Authority, which will develop Ontario's integrated power system plan. Imagine that, a 20-year plan. And by the way, it's not cast in stone. When we created the Power Authority, when we created the concept, we subjected it in law to 3-year review. So if somebody invents, a better mousetrap, we'll be able to respond. If our numbers are off in one planning cycle, we can adjust. It's flexible, it's fair, and it will bring on supply that allow us to meet our needs. The directive recognizes that Ontario will continue to need nuclear power as part of our balanced supply mix. What this means is that we'll need to build new nuclear facilities, currently estimated at 1,000 megawatts, as well as refurbishing the balance of our existing nuclear fleet. It was a difficult choice, one that we did not make lightly, but there's no question It was the right decision for Ontario, and we're moving forward. You know, half of these lights today are run by nuclear power. When you go back to your office, half your computer screen, nuclear power. Now, by the end of our plan, we think that'll be down to about 40%. But again, we're moving forward. And there are challenges with nuclear. Historically, construction cost overruns, treatment of nuclear waste, these are all issues that we need to have a good, thorough talk about. And we are. But you know what? There's only one government in Ontario's history that's brought a nuclear power project in on time and on budget, and that was our government. PIC-A Unit 1 refurbishment. We said it would cost $1 billion, and it cost $1 billion. We said it would take 18 months, and it took 18 months. And believe me, we sweat that thing every day. They are enormously complex challenges, as Murray and others in the nuclear industry know, and you have to manage them very, very carefully. Now, let me talk a little bit about coal, because I know that drives some of our critics a little bit crazy. First of all, what we have said about coal is that our first priority is system reliability. Nothing more, nothing less. And until we can assure ourselves that that system will run reliably, there will be enough power, then the coal plants will stay open. But make no mistake, we are as committed today as we were 3 years ago to phasing out coal power, and I've asked the Power Authority to give us a plan or a recommended course of action as to how we will achieve that. You know, it's interesting. I was up in Niagara Falls, or I guess down in Niagara Falls, and an author from the University of Waterloo, a history professor, was telling me that when they first built Niagara Falls, do you know what they called hydroelectric power? White coal. One of the principal objectives of those developments was to move us off coal because it was dirty. At the time, it was expensive. The extraction of coal was unsafe that time. And we have to import every rock of coal we use. 1905, folks. So, yesterday we see published the first real hard numbers around global warming and what it's costing the economy. Those beetles in British Columbia and Alberta that are eating our forests up, it's already a global warming problem because the climate's not getting cold enough in the winter to kill them. Today's paper, read about the deer running across our 400 series highways throughout southwestern Ontario. Why? One of the reasons, it's not cold enough early enough to settle them down. So it's real and it's costing us. We can't ignore it. Technologies and costs, the so-called clean coals. The technologies that we have today get the NOx, the SOx, the particulate. They don't get the CO2. Now, can somebody develop a technology that gets the CO2? I imagine we can. It doesn't exist today. And until we get the CO2s, I can't call it clean coal. So, from investments in our nuclear infrastructure to cogen projects, from natural gas plants to wind farms, we have a comprehensive plan for managing our needs. Our plan is but a building block for a long-term future. And we've created an environment that has generated significant public and private sector investment in the last 3 years. Just a couple of things on that. The entire wind industry, the renewable industry, is all done in the private sector. All done in the private sector. They're making money, and they're investing. Close to $13 billion, as I said earlier. The other thing that happened this year didn't get a whole lot of attention paid to it. It's tucked away in my budget in March. The first time, we paid down $1 billion in the old Ontario Hydro's stranded debt. That's 1/20th of the debt that was outstanding. Last 6 years, 7 years, stranded debt was actually going up. One of the reasons that happened is Ontario Power Generation's turned around. it's making money again. Imagine that. Virtual monopoly energy producer that was losing money. That's how crazy it was. It was all about politics. And we're trying to take the politics out of that. We understand how important reliable and affordable power is to Ontario, and conservation is a crucially important part of that. We're seeing, as I said earlier, plans afoot right across the province. Over 500 conservation programs in place now, and I predict that you'll see more of that in the future. Last week, the North American Electricity Reliability Council released results of an audit of the way Hydro One runs the province's transmission system. Now, Rita Burrack's the chair. She's up here today. Tom Parkinson's the president, excuse me. And they said Ontario Hydro's attention to network security and its high-tech grid control center in Barrie are examples of excellence that other utilities can learn from. And they're very right about that. But we can't be complacent, far from it. We have a lot more to do, and we're committed to doing it. And we're committed to staying the course. We're committed to people paying the true price of electricity. We're committed to ensuring that we have enough supply. We're committed to ensuring that we go from last to first in terms of renewable and clean and green power, because we believe at the core of our being that we cannot ignore global warming, and that the energy sector, particularly the energy sector here in Ontario where we consume so much of it, has to contribute to reductions of those so-called greenhouse gases. We've set ambitious targets and goals, and we are committed to meeting them. We are leading by example. Again, conservation. Again, supply. Do you know the Government of Ontario set a goal of cutting its own electricity consumption by 10%? By 2007, we're 90% of the way there. 90% of the way there, and we're going to keep going until we get that last 10%. We are building a culture of conservation in this province, and we're doing it as quickly as you can. You know, I like to say it takes a lot to change a culture. Think about the Blue Box program. Started in the early 1980s, excuse me. We still haven't achieved 40% diversion, but we've made huge strides forward. Huge strides forward. So there is more to do, and we're committed to doing that, and we're committed to staying the course, because it's the right thing for Ontario, it's the right thing for our economy, it's the right thing for Canada. Our economy is crucial to this country, as you know. Many of you are key players in that. So, as I like to say, you know, when I was a young guy studying economics at McGill, they taught us in your very first year course, there's only two ways to reduce price. One, you increase supply. Two, you decrease demand. And we're doing both. Now, all the energy lawyers like Linda would like to complicate that, and they do, and Adam, and certainly the independent power producers. But that's the essence of the argument, and Howard regulates it all. I can't understand any of them when they come to see me. But we're winning. Our prices today are lower than they were in 2002, 2003. Our prices are lower than New York, California, Pennsylvania, Texas, Massachusetts, New Jersey. And we're about even with Michigan and Ohio. Now, we cannot have power as inexpensive as Quebec and Manitoba. We can't. Their geological gift is that they tilt into Hudson's and James Bay more than we do, unless somebody can figure out a way to put Northern Ontario on hydraulic lifts. We don't have the hydro capacity. There's more there, and I've directed OPG to find it, somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000 megawatts. And there's some great companies in the room. I know I see former Prime Minister John Turner on the board at Northland Power. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us today. It's great to see you here and see you looking so well. That are continuing to find those opportunities, and we will continue to look for them. We will turn every stone to find them. So, huge investments going on, conservation starting to work, a hybrid market that's accepted even by our political opponents. We've brought stability like we said we would. We've changed the direction. We've got big challenges ahead of us, but we're committed to making them. And with all the people you see up here, I've had a little bit of fun with some of them, all the people you see up here and many of you in this room, we will meet those challenges. And our greatness in the supply of energy, particularly electricity, Ontario will restore that. And we will have a competitive advantage again instead of a competitive disadvantage. We're going to stay the course, we're going to work hard, and we're going to help ensure that our economy continues to be the place to invest, not only in North America, but indeed around the world. Thank you so much for having me today.